Welcome back to day 4 of the Waterline Summit. It's been brought to you by Marketing Humber alongside event partners the University of Hull, Yorkshire Water, Orsted and the Yorkshire Energy Park. And for 2021, our COP26 partner is Zero Carbon Humber. Thanks to today's sponsor, who is Living with Water. The community sponsor of this session are the Humber Outreach Programme and Active Humber. Good morning. Good morning to you all. Good morning from into the Humber. My name is Steve Cann. I'm a Director of Future Food Solutions. We are a food industry focused supply chain consultancy, guiding farmers and food companies to explore and adopt innovative techniques that drive sustainable competitive advantage. Our support helps partners to collaborate more effectively, improving supply chain viability and long-term resilience. Through the last few years, we've developed a range of tools that enable us to measure, build sustainability and forging stronger links with our supply chain partners. We started working in food-related supply chains 22 years ago, specialising in improving the connectivity between the different actors within the chain. We focused in on supply chain sustainability and efficiency, and then quickly realised that on-farm efficiency improvements also reduced carbon footprint, which led us to realise that there was improvements in resilience, soil health, water quality, reducing carbon. Many of these have been initiated and been based on nature-based solutions, which have latterly moved into regenerative agriculture, which hopefully sets us up nicely for this morning's session. We've got some superb panelists on here today, and we're all ready to go. And I'm really pleased to put in our first speaker of the day, who is Steve Noblet. Steve is an international trade advisor, food and drink specialist for Yorkshire and the Humber, and he's with the Department for International Trade, and he's going to give us a keynote speech this morning, hopefully focusing on where we're going, where we're headed, and maybe giving us a bit of some pinpoints as to the key areas and the focus that we'll need to have to grow our market going forward in this brave new world. Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. My name is Stephen Noblet, and as they mentioned, I'm the Food and Drink Sector Specialist for the Department of International Trade for Yorkshire, Humber and Northern Powerhouse. So what is the definition of sustainable consumption and what are we doing about it? Well, commonly used definitions, which the United Nations Environmental Programme uses and also the British government, is the use of services and related products which respond to basic needs and bring a better quality of life while minimizing the use of natural resources and toxic materials, as well as the emission of waste and pollutants over the life cycle of the service or the product. And this is the important bit, and as not to jeopardize the needs of future generations. And this is widely used as a means of expressing sustainability. And we're going on it. So it has been proven by the United Nations and by the British government that improved efficiency can reduce energy demand by 50 to 80% for most production and utility systems. Some 60 to 80% improvements in energy and water efficiency are commercially viable in sectors such as construction, agriculture, hospitality, and transport. So why are companies looking towards this, and what does sustainability bring to them? Well, I'm going to run through what as governments are doing and where we stand in the sustainable and green countries, and I'm going to give you some examples of what some Yorkshire Humber companies are doing to understand where we're going. Now, the interesting thing going forward, and most people don't believe this, that most of the greenest and most sustainable countries in the world are located in Europe, which comes as a bit of a surprise to most of us. The way this is measured is under a practice called the Environmental Performance Index, the EPI. Now, this measures performances over all of the countries. Now, there are 24 indicators used to analyse each country. And some of these include water quality, air quality, sanitation, recycling, etc. It all goes into the Sustainable Living Guide. So the top 10 ranked countries are closest to meeting these environmental and sustainable policy goals. And they are, this was published on the 21st of September this year, so it's very, very relevant to us, quite honestly. So Denmark takes #1 position in the world. followed by Luxembourg. Switzerland is always in the top 5. It does very well. And here's the good news or surprising news. United Kingdom comes in 4th place, followed by France, Austria, Finland, Norway, and Germany. Now, obviously, some people will be saying that we're not doing enough, and our companies aren't as well. But the United Kingdom comes out well out of this. So now, what are we doing at DIT towards this sustainability and towards providing something better for the world? So as we know, on Tuesday, the Majesty's government set out its net zero plans towards COP26. So at DIT and Exemplars Group, we are working towards the fact that any organisation needs to bid for a public sector contract more than 5 million needs to have a CRP in place. It needs a carbon reduction plan in place so it can go for government bids. We in turn are putting in place an exemplar social value work, which has been developed on. It's helping us where day-to-day change in operations are needed, so we're making use to our carbon use as well. Now, to have our CRP in place, we're doing 4 relatively straightforward things at Exemplars and DIT. We're putting our benchmark position of where we're going to be, and we're taking that from the 1st of April 2019 to March 2020, and we're going to move hopefully downwards from there. We're creating carbon reduction plans and targets so we can all achieve what we're doing. We're going to measure against these on a constant basis, and we're going to publish and be transparent on how we do this and what we're doing, so people can see that we as a government organisation or a delivery partner are actually engaging in sustainability and in what we need to do to bring down carbon where we are across our delivery programme. So I contacted a few of the companies that I'm working with. I thought this was the best way of showing you how they are involved in sustainability, and also they're in the export and the manufacturing business. This brings them down to what do they see as, 1, the reason they're doing it, and B, exactly what are they doing. So I chose 3 examples for you from a small, a medium and a multinational, so you have an across-the-board view of what we're doing in Yorkshire and the Humber. So number 1 is Jason Bull, who's a managing director at Eurostar Commodities of Huddersfield, and they're flour, rice importers, processors and distributors to the retail market and across the world. So now they installed new packaging machines some 7 months ago, and they were using plastic polypropylene for shrink wrapping and for their bags. All of it is out. They're now using paper for all their flour bags, completely recycled, and the polypropylene is out, and has also been wrapped in recycled. It goes into all their new machines. All their new gluten-free chapati flour and baking flour is 100% recyclable, from the packaging they're using to the boxes to the outer wrap. From their suppliers, they audited their suppliers where the products come in from the world. This is an interesting one. So they're buying their rice and their grain from carbon neutral suppliers that fits their ethos and sustainability of what we're doing and where we're going from a future point of view. We're talking to them about how they do that. So the waste material from the rice and the grain processing plants is used for heating in these plants. That factory recycles the husk for energy. They're able to offer this manufacturer carbon neutral in its manufacturing base, which in turn means that Eurostar Commodities can go on and use this as part of their interest and their demand from their suppliers. Is the more important thing, which is what's going on. Because a survey that was recently done by Global Data found out that 4 out of 10 UK consumers factor in sustainability when purchasing or when considering purchasing. This is increasing as things are maintained. Next, a company we know quite well up here in Yorkshire was Harrogate Spring Water. So their electricity for their factory is generated from renewable sources. This saved them 1,140 tonnes of CO2 estimated in 2020. They choose all their rPET locally from the lowest carbon footprint suppliers. Their bottles were changed and made out of UK post-consumer plastic. They don't import from Europe, and they use the plastic that's recycled in the United Kingdom for their bottles. They again have also acquired certified carbon credits from projects abroad. So in a total in 2020, they removed 4,500 tons of virgin PET from their production in their factories. They locate 99% of the raw materials within 110 miles of their factory by factoring out purchasing from overseas. And their recycled PET bottles and their caps, which is the important thing, lowered the company's CO2 emission by 22%. And this is very much part of Harrogate Spring Water's ethos and what they do. It's all over their packaging, and they are really leading on what they're doing. This has increased their sales, no doubt about it, and has been told to me. The next is a big multinational. Some people might not know them, Ferrero, one of the largest ice cream manufacturers in the world, based in North Yorkshire, their head offices. And the sort of volumes they're using really does impact on what we're doing and where we're going. So I had a chat with their team and their sales directors, and they gave me some absolutely stunning information on what Ferrero is doing. Now, this is worldwide, not just Yorkshire and Humber. This affects their manufacturing places in 13 countries around the world. So they have removed, in the last 14 months, 200 million plus single-use spoons, straws, cups, and lids. They are now moving to 100% recyclability in all of their products, so that they can actually use this as the major selling point across the world in multi-languages. They use palm oil. Palm oil committed comes from the Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil. Again, the whole principles and criteria are met by Ferrero, so their people, their customers are looking at this and taking it out. The wood they use in their manufacturing process comes from program for endorsement of forest certification. Depending on which country they're coming from, the forests are 100% managed, they're replanted, and the highest ethical and social and standards are put in. In the United Kingdom, they own Kelly's, the big ice cream people down in Devon. They're busy planting up huge meadows and using it for their cows, where they're rearing their milk, so that the grass is better and what they're doing with it on it. In Finland, which is amazing, they removed all of their plastic in their packaging. So therefore they're using sugar-based, sugar-protected drinking cups and coatings. They no longer use plastic lids. They do not use anything in there that they can be deemed to be not fitting into their sustainable and carbon reduction program. So that is basically 3 companies in Yorkshire and the Humber and worldwide that we're working with. That's what DIT Ferrero are doing. DIT Ferrero, Eurostar Commodities, and Harrogate Spring Water. The 4 of us, I know, are probably small in what we need to do, but we all have our own plans. They work with us at DIT, we work with them, and it is most definitely an inquiry and a sales point when we're talking about exporting, for people who are saying, can I see your ethical trading policy? Can I see your CRP, your carbon reduction plan? What are you using in your products? And this is without a shadow of doubt driving our exports forward. And I like to think that we at Yorkshire and the Humber are leading in this. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Stephen Noblett, International Trade Advisor at Yorkshire and the Humber Department of International Trade.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed for that, Steve. Fascinating presentation. Got a couple of questions that have come through, and just one from me, just to we're okay for time, so if that's okay with you, just ask something. You mentioned in your presentation that improving efficiency is key to growing our international trade. Have you got any tips or any kind of guidance for firms in areas they should be looking at? Are our international customers looking at certain end results? Is there anything that you can give them some guidance on?
Well, international customer, yeah. I mean, our people that are trading with the major buyers abroad, there is no doubt that all forms of reduction in anything they're using in plastics or anything they're using in energy is #1 on the agenda. They need to know before they'll commit to buying. They want to see what we're doing in the United Kingdom. They want to see what our companies are doing. And sustainability is right at the very top. And if you get it right, as we've just seen from the United Nations Development Programme data that came through and from global sources, clever use of our raw materials and the right use of machinery can reduce our energy costs by 60%. Well, that enables us to invest more or to be more profitable to go forward. So it's a no-brainer, Steve. We've just got to look at all aspects of this, drive our costs down in a sustainable way, and bring a really good, cost-efficient, carbon-neutral product to the market.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. There's one question here from Phil Withers, which is on in the chat, and what Phil is asking about is environmental social governance, and what he's suggesting is, can the DTI encourage companies, accountants, and advisors to lift their understanding of environmental social governance kind of principles when they're going forward and they're building their business plans?
That's a marvelous question from RSM. Yes, that's wonderful. I think we could take this offline and involve some of our major policymakers at DIT to understand how we could do that, Steve. And I think it's a great driver. Yes, a very, very good idea.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that. Thanks, Steve. That was a great presentation. Okay, we're just moving now on to, we're going to hear from Caroline Ashley. Caroline is the Global Director of System Change Programs at Forum for the Future. Karen will be presenting on why transforming food is such a critical, pivotal point in dealing with climate, nature, livelihoods and nutrition, drawing on work by Forum for the Future, outlining some of the emerging opportunities and some trade-offs in shifting to regenerative farming as part of a net zero transition. She'll also be reflecting on the role of agribusiness, farmers, government and citizens, and the part they can play in this urgent transition. Over to you, Caroline.
Thanks very much, Steve, and great to be here. Thanks for having us at this summit. So my role today is to speak from the perspective of Forum for the Future. We're an international non-profit working on sustainability to accelerate that transition to a sustainable future. So we're trying to bridge where we are now with the practical things that you'll hear from several speakers to where we absolutely need to be, which is a future that's socially just for people and regenerative for our planet. We do actually have a project in the Humber on the just transition, but that's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about sort of the big picture of why food is at the nexus of our challenges and at the nexus of our solutions. So there is good news as well as bad news. So what's specific about food relative to other things in the whole climate debate? And I think food is essential. I'm sorry that COP26 coming up in Glasgow is not focusing heavily on food. But food has got the social and the ecological issues. On the one hand, we've got the social issues, the resilient producer livelihoods, because so many people work as producers in food, producers, workers, farmers. And of course, for all of us, that healthy, nutritious diet is absolutely essential. It's not something that's just a concern of a few, it's for all of us. But food is driving 25 to 30% of our carbon emissions globally, and we've absolutely got to address that. And it's also critical to the catastrophic nature loss that we're experiencing. And we know we can't solve that just by some conservation measures on their own. It's got to be how we use our land differently. So it's at the nexus of all these problems. No, we're not going into details about IPCC reports in this session, which is focused on food, but I just want to remind us of the scenarios we are on. We're on track for 3 degrees of warming this century. And it is millennia since we were at more than 2.5 degrees higher. It was over 3 million years ago. And we're actually heading for 1.5 degrees by 2050, or the latest evidence is actually by 2040. And it sounds so far away to talk about the end of the century. But hey, my kids who were born around the beginning of this century may well be alive then. I may well be alive at 2040. And I think many people on this can see that this period of change, this huge turbulence coming, is actually within lifetimes of us, our children, our nieces, our nephews, our grandchildren, whoever. So it's really urgent. So as I said, food and agriculture currently contributes around 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So the change we have to do has got to be really deep. I want to argue that the change is going to transform what we produce and what we consume and how we produce and how we consume. It's also got to be urgent, because we know the only way we can stay below 2 degrees of warming is to slash emissions before 2030. And also, sadly, some global heating is inevitable. Under the best scenario, we will still have global warming of 1.5 degrees before we might come back down after it. And food and agriculture will be really badly hit, whether that's rainfall, temperature, change in seasons. So as we adapt how we farm, we also have to adapt to global heating as well as mitigating carbon. So it's quite a challenge we have before us. I do think it's a lot more difficult than energy, to be honest, where we just have to shift to renewable. So systemic solutions are needed working across the system. So what does this mean for farming, for business, for consumers? We've probably already heard quite a lot about we have to cut down our red meat consumption and we have to plant more trees. This was the report from the UK Committee on Climate Change, which is a government advisory body. And that's right, but I want to dig a bit deeper into what is this actually about. We've already heard mention of regenerative agriculture, but I think we need to think seriously about what this really means and how extensive the transformation is in our farming system if we go for this. You can see the difference between healthy soil and dust. Our current agricultural system worldwide, I'm not just talking about the UK, is we have really intensive monocropping, whether this piece of land is to maximize the litres of milk for dairy, or whether this piece in Ghana is to maximize the output of cocoa, tons per annum. That's been our approach. Aggressively fertilize, intensify, and produce the maximum of one thing, which absolutely destroys the land and the soil productivity over time, as you can see in the photo. Regenerative agriculture is about a way of agriculture that actually enhances the health of the soil, sequesters carbon. And I know we hear a whole load of things about carbon sequestration and technology. The only known solution we have so far is the soil, apart from the oceans, which are actually pretty much already full. Their capacity to absorb carbon is going down. So soil is the thing we know. So we have to farm in a way where we actually sequester carbon, not produce more CO2. Regenerative agriculture means, therefore, we have cover crops. You have multiple crops that do that. Doesn't just mean you have multiple crops, it means you have multiple crops and trees. That comes back to the tree planting. It doesn't just mean you have crops and trees, it means you have crops and trees and some livestock passing through. Not as many as we have today, but they pass through at the right time and they fertilize the soil with manure and they break up the substrate in the sort of ecological role that buffalo used to have on the plains. Doesn't just mean you have crops and trees and livestock, it means you have ecological services. You have carbon sequestration, you have ecosystem services, maybe you have education, research, and leisure as well on that piece of land. So a farmer who used to be a wheat farmer actually becomes a steward of the land, and every piece of land we have to think differently about what is the best use of this land. I think that's the future of farming that we are heading for and should head for if we're actually serious about regenerative agriculture. But it takes a huge shift in how we think about land, how we think about livelihoods, and how those supply chains are going to work, and how consumers are going to buy and understand their food. So you might have picked up, this is not a meat versus vegan conversation, and it's sad that it's been polarized so much as that. It's about monocropping versus regenerative multiple land use. There is some space for livestock in the system, but it's less than it is today, and it's about them having the right role. This is actually an example from the US of a cattle farm that is carbon negative because of how it is managed. I think that's an extreme, but shows it can be done. So what does this mean for business and consumers? Because it obviously means a lot for farmers. Businesses and consumers are already adapting. They're really focusing on plant-based food. We see a lot about the beetroot burger. I was as sad as anyone to see Ferrero leave Bake Off last week. I thought that was a real signal of change in what's happening in the UK. And meat consumption is already going down, and investors are being more careful about the deforestation in the Amazon that is done to grow the soy that is used for cattle feed, which is the absolute worst kind of cattle farming. All of that is great. I think we need much more. I think we need to think about how all the procurement chains work, how the information flows to consumers, and how farmers are going to be supported to really, really transition their livelihoods in a way that supplies food differently. That also is not enough. Food poverty is rife, and there was just a new report came out last week about the percentage of people who are worrying about food and food insecure. And I noticed that the Humber was one of the regions that had most local authorities with the highest percentage of people who are insecure. In Hull, 13% of people said they were hungry in January, compared to a national average of 4%. We cannot afford to change our food system and leave people hungry. We also can't afford to change our food system and leave people having access to calories that are not nutritious. So there's a whole load of things we need to do to work on access to healthy food. I don't know if anyone saw the Earthshot prizes on TV on Sunday night, but this community food hub in Milan, they won one of the 10 prizes. They're about preventing food waste, tackling hunger, providing healthy food. Those kind of initiatives can really make a difference. Meat-Free Monday, down on the photo of the kids, obviously, is initiatives that are helping children adapt to healthy meat-free diets. Also, of course, it's all about making sure that food is accessible and constantly available to school children. All these kind of initiatives have to run with this carbon-free diet. And for consumers, I don't think it's just about changing our diets and feeling that's our own responsibility. I think it's also about demanding information, asking questions, looking at labels, asking why labels aren't there. So having a voice is not just about what we eat, it's about how we act. So in summary, farm to fork, this is from an EU plan, but I think it summarizes it well. It's about production, processing and distribution, food consumption, and addressing food loss and waste. We need to tackle the whole system. And maybe you're thinking change can't happen, it can't happen soon enough, food systems are too complicated, they can't transform, or maybe you think you personally can't make a difference. I really urge you to think again. 2 photos from Easter morning, 1900 and 1913 in New York. In the first one, horse-drawn carriages all the way, there is one motorized vehicle. In the second one, 13 years later, motorized vehicles all the way, there is actually hidden in this photo one horse. 13 years transformation. I really think that's what we can do ourselves as well. Thanks very much.
That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Caroline. That's a fascinating presentation. You've really lifted some interesting areas that we can definitely discuss in the Q&A later. I've got a whole range of questions that I will be asking you, but your timing is impeccable. It's just gone to 12. Just gone up to 12 o'clock, and Bob is now ready and in full all ready to go. Bob Doherty is our next speaker. He's a Professor of Marketing and Chair in Agri-Food, University of York, Management School and Fix Our Food. Bob will be discussing the vision for a Yorkshire food system, regenerative hybrid food economies and farming, as well as the role of the next generation of food system change makers for a healthy and sustainable food future. So Bob, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Steve, and it's really good to be invited to the Waterline Summit, and I thank all the organisers for making it work. It's also great to be part of a panel with Stephen and Caroline, and I'm going to build a little bit on what they've been talking about. And I think the first place to start is food has become front and centre in debates in the media over the past couple of years. If you think of the government's 25-year environment plan, then we have the national food strategy, and obviously during the pandemic, food has had a great focus, both from its impact on the environment, but also the impact on human health as well. And Fix Our Food, the programme that Steve mentioned, which is based at the University of York, which I lead, is about transforming the food system to a more positive, planetary and human health position. And we're working with all stakeholders in Yorkshire, food companies, consumer groups and farmers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those in a moment. And obviously school children as well. We have a range of a number of schools where we're working with to change their menus, change their educational resources, etc. But I think, first of all, what I want to say is the key to looking at food, as Caroline said, is to look at it as a system. If you're going to intervene to, cut greenhouse gas emissions or to improve dietary health, you need to look at it as a system. So all those activities from production at farm level or fishing level, all the way to consumption and reuse and food waste. And you also need to look at the impacts, the environmental impacts, like climate change, and also the socio-economic impacts, like the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, the kind of low wage economy. All these things need to be factored in when you're looking at the food system. And I think with greenhouse gas emissions, there is really no silver bullet. I'm going to recommend now, and I'm going to talk about a kind of a multi-pronged framework across the food system to tackle and reduce greenhouse gas emissions within our food system. Not only in Yorkshire, because some of these lessons can be learnt and they can go beyond Yorkshire to right across the United Kingdom, but also in globally as well. The first one, as a number of people have already mentioned, is to move to a more balanced diet. And I'm surprised, actually, there's not been more kind of public information in this area. If you think that poor dietary health was one of the top 3 risk factors in the pandemic, so I think that alone should give us a bit of a spark. You know, more fruit and vegetables, more plant-based proteins, but those plant-based proteins also need to be healthy. It's important that we don't substitute highly processed food with another highly processed food. So I think that's a key lesson to learn. And secondly, is to have a look at production. And Caroline's already said some of these amazing practices in Yorkshire around regenerative farming. There's a platform of farmers, a group of farmers called Future Farmers. There's also Steve's group of Sustainable Farmers as well, all working together to look at practices that reduce those inputs that are expensive, that do lead to emissions of methane and nitrous oxide and carbon, such as fertilizers and pesticides, actually taking a more regenerative approach with a set of principles of no bare soil, reduced tillage, you know, using, when I say no bare soil, as Caroline said, using cover crops and mixed lays, you know, fixing nitrogen back into the soil. And the great thing about these farmers is they're so proud of their soil, improving their soil health. They always carry a spade with them and always dig it up to show you their soil substrate. And that actually is more medium and long-term thinking about, you know, because you have a very poor quality soil, you need to keep adding more fertilizer and more pesticide onto the land, which is just a vicious circle, really. It's like a trap, and that obviously leads to water pollution and so on and so forth. So there's lots of advantages to regenerative farming, but we do need to look at how we can help farmers prove the concept, and that's what we're doing with our research. We're helping farmers to do trials, test different approaches, to give them the data to persuade other farmers to go down the same route. I think the other thing about regenerative farming is that integrated arable and livestock approach, bringing them both together. And I think I'd like to really see more of that in the United Kingdom. We've got too kind of monocultured about the way that we do farm. The second thing is the use of technology. You know, using more smarter technologies to reduce the inputs. You know, early detection of pests and diseases is very important, and using all that raft of the Internet of Things to intervene on farm is really important. Reducing food waste. We heard of the example of the Milan Food Hub, where they aggregate all the food waste from the city and they redistribute that into areas of disadvantage, but also make new products out of that as well. And there are food hubs in Yorkshire. There's Rooted Whole, for example. We'd like to see this kind of approach scaled up. There's Food Circle in York, where they're aggregating food that would have otherwise gone to waste. Some of it on farm, some of it from farm, where a retailer might say, we don't need that percentage of carrots anymore. We only need that amount. And what does the farmer do with the other amount? So we also need to think about what we do with the least productive land up in the uplands. You know, how do we incentivize farmers, you know, to you know, do more ecological approaches to improve and reduce the environmental impact of farming. I did like in the Earthshot TV program on Sunday night, the example of Costa Rica, where they paid the farmers for this kind of environmental land management activity. And that's what we've got to do in the United Kingdom as well. We need to also assess the impacts of imports using data science. Caroline mentioned soy. Soy does have, if it's produced in not certified organic, if it's produced in other ways, can have a really deteriorating impact on biodiversity, and that's invisible to the consumer because it's used in animal feed in the main, and therefore it is a problem. So we need to we shouldn't be externalizing our environmental impact. We should be looking at it in the whole, in the round. And I think that's then, therefore, consumers need more information. I'd like to see more data provided to consumers about the impacts of the food system, both positive and negative, so they can actually make an informed choice. consumers do find it difficult. So I'd like to see a uniform label, actually, not just a proliferation of different types of labels, but a label that tells the consumers exactly the story behind this particular product. Finally, I think innovation can play a real role, not just high-tech innovation like smart agriculture, but also social innovation as well, and changing supply chains and processes. Some of the examples that Steve talked about in his presentation, but also innovation in communities getting together to grow products together, more urban farming as well, more kind of innovation in the waste sector. You know, there's a real opportunity in Yorkshire. We've got something special. We've got a really, really interesting bioeconomy where people are using food waste to make new products, and led by the Biorenewable Development Centre at the University of York. And I think examples like this of innovation do need to be scaled up. We need, in the government's innovation strategy, I'd like to see an investment in these circular and regenerative approaches. So I think I've given you a kind of view of the food system, where we need to intervene, a multi-coherent framework, where we're developing innovations and new approaches in different parts of the food system. And as I said, there's no silver bullet. We all have to work collectively: farmers, manufacturers, processors, and also consumers. Thank you very much, Steve, for your time, and everybody, and hopefully you found that stimulating. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Bob. Super presentation. You really did pull up some interesting areas for us to discuss later in the Q&A. Just reflecting back on Steve Noblett's presentation earlier, he was talking about some research that said 4 out of 10 of UK consumers consider sustainability when making purchasing decisions. That seems low to me at this moment in time. I'd love to see that increasing more. And you just went in to talk a little bit about more data being available to consumers relating to a product's sustainable journey. How do you see that happening? Who could instigate that? Who could make that happen?
Yeah, I think it's needs a partnership between government and industry, and academia as well, because you need the right science. You need to use the right data, the right interpretation of data, taking it in the round, looking at full life cycle analysis, if you will, and providing something that's across every product. Because I think labels are good. I mean, labels are proven to be useful. I mean, the fair trade movement has used a label to scale up its sales in the UK now to over £2 billion. But there is a lot of labels. And so I think one uniform label that has a lot of work behind it, and there is work going on at the moment about, focused on what could this label look like, I think would actually be very, very helpful for consumers, because consumers do want more information, but they want the information to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Consistent. That's what I would say. And the 4 in 10, I think, is just about, it will just keep on increasing, I think. In different demographics, it might be higher, but I do think it will continue to increase.
No, I agree. I think one of the factors that we've got in our favour is we've got some superb universities here in Yorkshire. Some of the work that you guys are doing, really pushing the envelope, really starting to challenge industry to kind of broaden its impact in the areas of environmental areas, in sustainability. I mean, we've certainly worked a lot with York and Leeds, really pleased, and Hull as well. These universities are leading edge and really are pushing that sort of envelope of understanding of where we can take this. We're in a kind of an interesting time. You mentioned with regards, you talked about there's no silver bullet to kind of manage greenhouse gas emissions. It's something that is quite concerning, and it's something that, a bit of a question to ask you around urgency. Do you think people understand the urgency? Do you think there's enough kind of a realization as to where we are in the time scale of all of this?
Probably not. I mean, I did see a wonderful presentation once by leading climate scientists on what the impact of different increases in temperature would have on the UK in terms of the water, which land would be underwater, And I think you do see increasing magnitude of these problems. You know, if you take the fires in Australia, the North America last year, the year before, and these events were taking place all at the same time, and the flooding in South Yorkshire as well. And if you speak to farmers, actually farmers on the ground, they will say that they used to get these kind of climatic events once every 10 years, maybe, once every 10 or 15 years. Now they're taking place every year. And there's not only one event, there could be 2 or 3 different events. So they're often repairing, riverbanks, fields are out of, because they're flooded and they're boggy. So farmers themselves are actually wrestling with these issues. I think they do see the urgency, but I think we need to get that message right across to all those consumers, those 6 out of 10 people who are not factoring in sustainability. So, things like COP26, things like the Waterline Summit, but we do need more probably need more public information, Steve.
No, thank you very much for that, Bob. Really interesting, and you also talked about regenerative agriculture. It's another area where there really is a massive amount of interest and a lot of change. We've certainly got some farmers that we're working with now who are looking to have cover crops grazed off with sheep, which brings a whole different biological element to the soil when the cover crop and the biomass has been passed through the sheep system. And our soil scientist, Neil Fuller, is absolutely really taken by that as the next step. One of the challenges with that particular element of regenerative agriculture is that not all soil conditions are ideal for being able to manage livestock, but certainly sheep are lighter and probably easier to manage that. But Bob, great presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm just pleased to see that that we've now been joined by Nigel Davis. Dr. Nigel Davis is his Sunday name, who's joined us. And I'm not even sure where Nigel is. Looks like he's probably in this country. But bless you, Nigel. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much indeed. I'm going to give you a little bit of a lead in, give you a second to probably catch your breath. I would imagine you've just jumped off a tube or something there in London. But this is Dr. Nigel Davis. He's Director of Technical and Sustainability at Muntons PLC. Nigel's based down at the Suffolk HQ, but Muntons have a facility up here in Yorkshire as well, just outside Bridlington. Nigel's going to tell us about the Muntons story. He's going to talk about their sustainability journey and how sustainability is a common objective that links all of the aspects of their business. I'm hoping that Nigel will be able to elaborate a bit more on those success stories and maybe connect into farm sustainability at the same time. So you've got 1 or 2 other questions that are coming up. I'm going to leave them for now. But Nigel Davis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. That was about the tightest I think I could possibly have left it. I've been speaking at I'm actually in Ipswich. I haven't caught the train yet. It's an interesting day. I've been speaking at a sustainability conference in Ipswich this morning. Then I've got the joy of speaking to you now, and then I get on a train at 3:30 to go up to London for a black tie do to see whether one of our innovations in sustainability actually is going to win the Baking Industry Award. So be interesting.
Good luck with that, Nigel. Good luck with that.
Thank you. So do I have control of the slides? I'm not sure now. Do I? It says I'm controlling it. There we go. I am controlling it. Excellent. It's working. It's all nice when the technology works. So this is me. Steve mentioned a couple of big pieces on that. You'll notice that I've come with a few hats as Muntons Director of Technical and Sustainability. Last year, I decided that it was the right time to start developing my own sustainability consultancy through Malt Doctor Limited. Primarily because I found that businesses were perhaps struggling to understand how to develop a sustainability strategy, trying to understand largely what Scope 3 meant. And that's really important to this meeting here, talking about Scope 3, because working with Steve and with Paul and Future Food Solutions there, we've been able to do an awful lot to address Scope 3. And it's in a very practical way. It doesn't need, I'm sure lots of you have lots of consultants dropping you emails every day wanting to charge you many thousands of pounds, but maybe it's not always practical. So what's Munson's done then since 1921? It's 100 years for us this year. We've actually got to celebrate it next year because of COVID restrictions. But these are the sort of things that we've done. So we've actually set a science-based target to reduce our scope 1 and 2 emissions. The scope 1 and 2 emissions, if you don't know what those are, effectively what we use on site, so electricity and gas. 45% was the target that we had to reduce those from by 2025. We're actually going to achieve it by 2022. The scope 3, which I mentioned there, which are effectively is our farming of barley, growing and malting barley, we've already reduced that by 30% by using a particular type of fertilizer, and now we're working along with Future Food Solutions and Heineken and others to look for the next 30% that we can get through farming practices. Some of that was driven by me designing the world's first carbon calculator for malt back in 2006. I was bet £10 I couldn't develop one in 2 weeks, which I did. And then Farmers Weekly told me it was the most used, beg your pardon, the third most used carbon calculator in the UK. Interesting, but what it meant was that farmers wanted to be involved, but needed very simple, straightforward data. So 9 questions on my calculator. The next best one had 120, which even me as a sustainability professional struggled to understand some of the words. So Munson's has got a strategy to be carbon neutral by 2050. Carbon neutrality for us is not buying the good work that others have done. That's the worst sort of offsetting. We're looking to develop carbon capture and additional carbon capture from the atmosphere through the processes that are in our supply chain. So that will be additional carbon captured to that which is already used. So yes, you balance off what you've got, make it neutral, but then you can capture even more. That's what the Oxford Principles released last September referred to as the best sort of offsets. So in setting a science-based target, why did we bother? Well, 1,000 people have signed up to this, and the science-based target basically says that if you reduce your emissions by a certain amount, then you are going to minimize your impact on the planet, or the human impact on the planet, which is therefore will not allow the planet to rise in temperature by more than 1.5 or 2 originally centigrade. Now that only works if everybody does it, of course, but 1,000 people have signed up to say that's a good idea, but only 50% have set a target. I think that's rather a shame. Why should they, from a business perspective? 63% of company execs say it drives innovation. I think it does. We had saved 18% of our energy in 18 years. We're now going to save in excess of 60 in the next 5. So it just shows you really can drive it. 35% say that it improves regulatory resilience. In other words, you're ready for new laws when they come. And definitely 55% of company execs said if you have a legitimate science-based target, it will gain you more business. It absolutely does, because people want to deal with businesses that are credible, open, honest, and look across the whole supply chain. When we did our modeling, a lot of people said, well, which model are you using for carbon footprint? We found it didn't matter which model you used. The top 3 things were always the top 3: gas and electricity use on site and barley growing. And if you looked at the different models, they were only 6% different, really. So that meant I was 94% certain. So in my mind, that's good enough. I don't care which model I use. I just want to move. So we looked at the fertilizer and we said, well, there's a big proportion there. It did lead to a lot of boycotts, actually, and antagonism in the supply chain, because people thought we were saying it was their fault. However, after about 4 years of talking with the fertilizer producers, we realized that they had a plan in place to reduce part of their process by 90% emissions, which meant that the fertilizer was 40% reduced. So guess what? We said to our farmers, if it's the same cost, which it was, we now expect you to use that fertilizer because it's no cost to you, but you'll get a massive reduction in your carbon footprint. And then it switched to the obviously the soil. I would say there's more to come on the fertilizer as well, because companies like Yara are already talking about a carbon neutral fertilizer within a few years. I think they've probably already developed it. So that's brilliant. There'll be even more to come there. And then the work that we're doing with Future Food Solutions in farms around Yorkshire is looking at reducing those emissions from soil by the types of agronomy that you use, and by putting, for a very short window of time, you can put a cover crop like things like clover or vetch in there, and it will not only grab the carbon that's been used in growing the malting barley, it will grab even more. Hence, you've built yourself a carbon offset in a very nice place in your supply chain. Which brewer and distiller would not want to buy carbon offsets from within his own supply chain, as opposed to, say, buying a forest somewhere in Australia where it has been burnt down? So very important. And again, if you look at it, why was I able to move with a model like that? Well, because it's about certainty. So Scope 1 and Scope 2, electricity and gas, I get an invoice for those. So I'm 100% certain of 40% of my carbon footprint. Then, because of the carbon footprint calculator I developed, I was, as I've just said, within 6% certain of 60% of the Scope 3 emissions. So I'm certain of about 90% of my emissions, which means that I don't need to worry too much about the accuracy of the remaining bit, which is the Scope 3 downstream activities. You will be inundated with people telling you that you need to calculate these, but if you use a financial model, you can see that it's a very small part of the supply chain. This was our very simple carbon calculator. It told farmers that there were 9 things they needed to measure. They didn't need to go and get a new tractor. It might be a nice toy for them, but it wouldn't make a lot of difference to the carbon footprint. However, if they used the abated nitrogen fertilizer, they could reduce their carbon footprint by at least 30%. What an easy way to reduce your emissions, and without costing you anything. If you combine that with precision farming, where you only put on the nutrients or the pesticides that you need where you need them, you've got even greater savings available there. And we could get quite clever then about reporting that data and show that for scopes 1, 2, and 3, we've got some pretty remarkable changes. The biggest one in scope 2 was taking our waste material and because we're a brewery as well down in Stowmarket, and using that waste material, we could, through anaerobic digestion, make 14% of the site electricity. And then that started to widen our minds as to where else we could look. We then looked to see what different fuels were available. And in Yorkshire, there was a lot of fuel that was available where from forestry operations, wood chip was left on the forest floor or otherwise left to rot. There was nothing else you could do with it. However, we took that wood chip, we emitted the same CO2 that it would emit had it been lying on the forest floor, but we then heat our plant with it. So we get a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And guess what? We've just opened a similar one down at Stowmarket. So we've gone from 50,000 tons of CO2 emitted down to just under 10,000 already. So already the targets that the government's setting for 2035, we're not scared of. And we're saying if you look across your supply chain, you can get some very big percentage savings. Farmers aren't scared of that either. I'll let you take some of this in your own time, but you can see there's some very big figures on there, which farmers are saying they think it's very important. They see that it would make them more competitive. They could see that it would help them regulate costs. Many think it's very important. But it is important to take everybody with you, because some of the small farmers are saying, you know, they feel maybe a little left behind because maybe they don't understand what it's all about and need some help with that, but help is available. The World Resources Institute tell us that 73% reduction through agriculture is already possible. We don't need to wait for a lot of new technology. So I think that's quite exciting, because that's really saying that if you look at that, if you take the 15 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions, you can already see that we're doing a lot in those areas to reduce it. And then that leaves a very small amount that we have to offset. Now, I'm not in the camp of saying that's easy. Of course, it's not easy. You've got political barriers in there. You've got financial investment barriers in some parts of the world. But it shows the art of what's possible. And I think that that's really important. It was also important then to define sustainability. So we joined an organization called the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative Platform. They developed a standard called the Farm Sustainability Assessment, which is able to allow companies all the way around the world in different geographies and for different crops to use the same platform to define whether their crop is being grown in a sustainable way. Muntons was the first maltster globally to be audited by SGS to prove this was true. Some of our competitors said that's rubbish. Muntons are talking nonsense. It's not, you can't possibly comply with that standard. So when SGS said we did, we were very pleased about it. And lots, of course, have followed suit. The thing we find is very important is demystifying the language. So telling people what it means. So the work that we've just spoken about that we're doing with Future Farm Solutions and Heineken and our farmers in Yorkshire is talking about being climate positive. So not just about balancing the carbon, but going that step further. So it's got even beyond carbon zero and carbon neutral. But then it's very important, I think, to look at the way that you're setting your strategy. Those Oxford principles for net zero, carbon offsetting, which came out in September. I think if you haven't seen them, use that prompt, put it in Google, have a look at it. It really helps you develop that, roadmap for carbon saving. So in summary, hopefully I'm kept to time, Steve, these are the sorts of things that I think are really important for us to do as part of a supply chain. So wherever you're looking across the piece, certainly for us as maltsters, we want to look at energy efficiency. We've been looking at it for probably 30 years and improving there. We translated that about 20 years ago into carbon efficiency. So we were able to map our operations. And that then enabled us to see who we should be working with in the supply chain, and enabled us to look for new ways of reducing greenhouse gases. I think 20 years ago, we had no idea that it was going to be possible even to get to neutral, let alone to get to negative in malting barley and develop a market which could be another source of income for farmers. It's a really good story and one that we should be proud of. Definitely set a science-based target if organizations haven't. You need, you have to plan to achieve carbon zero, but I think carbon zero is probably a little bit elusive. To emit no carbon whatsoever, that's great, but I think we might even be further away from that. So carbon neutrality is a good goal, but then look for specific and measurable change by broadening out and having a look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which can be better when you're engaging your staff, because it's less, if you like, about productivity and energy use, and it's more about the social sides of sustainability. So I haven't spoken too much about those today, but ultimately you want to drive the business strategy to look at people, profit and planet, the so-called triple bottom line. It's not all about tree hugging, as many executives think in our supply chain. It is about business risk reduction, and business risk reduction by having a credible sustainability agenda will lead to getting better people in your organization. It will lead to getting more customers and retaining customers and making your business profitable for the future. Thanks.
That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Nigel, and great timing. You just got here at the right time. It was very good. Couple of questions for you. I mean, we've obviously worked together for quite some time, and we've known each other for a long while. What was it that got sort of Muntons heading down this sustainability journey so early? I mean, I know because we've been dealing with you for a long time. You were talking about sustainability before many other people in the supply chain. I just wonder what triggered that. You mentioned energy, but I just wonder what triggered that particular direction of travel that Muntons took.
Yeah, I think it depends on the leadership you get. So myself at the time and former MD Alan Rydalge we used to sometimes talk about what would happen if we were in charge, and then we found ourselves in charge. So we said we need to put this into practice. But we were both very keen on what we called low carbon at the time. We didn't really know what that meant because nobody could tell us what carbon was. So it was that movement. It's interesting, you know, because everyone says that this sort of sustainable change is driven by young people in the organisation. That is not necessarily the case. I think age shouldn't stop you driving a sustainability agenda. So Alan and myself at the time, what would we have been 20 years ago? We'd have been in our 40s. That's giving the game away. But we would have been. But we were very passionate about that, and I think I was pleased to be described at a recent conference as a silver bullet. I think it referred to the hair. But in other words, sometimes the younger people in the organisation have a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of ideas, but they don't know how to translate that into something that the board will adopt. Whereas maybe people like myself and others who are really enthusiastic about sustainability have the ability to capture those thoughts and drive them into a strategic agenda. And I think that was the word where the phrase silver bullet came from. I like that, but I think we need more people like that. And don't use age, and don't switch young people off as well. I've got a lot of time for people like Greta Thunberg and that, because I think she's highlighting the issues. But what I find also is a lot of young people get very angry, but don't know what to do, and then get disheartened and don't engage. We mustn't let that happen. More people in executive positions must listen and find practical ways, like we've done, Steve. You look at what we've done. We probably didn't guess that we'd have got to this point, and it's great that we had. You know, carbon negative barley. My goodness, we deserve a Nobel Prize, don't we?
Excellent. Thanks very much indeed, Nigel. Well, we're just moving now into the Q&A section, and there's a number of questions have been have been posed by the audience. And I would guess if it was possible to put your cameras back on, Steve, that would be great if you could. And we've got one or two, I've got a few questions, but I'm going to just pick off some of the questions that are sitting at the moment in the Q&A vault here. Interesting question here, and this is for Bob and Caroline. Would you advocate a new dig for Britain and encourage us to eat seasonally and restrict foreign imports where possible and to become more self-sufficient? Can I start with you first, Caroline?
Would encourage people to dig and grow food and gardens and allotments, and I think using more of our land for growing good food is important. Personally, I do try and eat seasonally. I'm so happy Cox's apples are coming back in. But I'm actually not going to be, I might surprise people by saying I'm not going to say you should never fly food. I think it's much more complicated than that. The transport of food is actually quite a low percentage of the carbon emissions from food. It's the obvious one. People know flying is bad. People don't know so much about what's happening in the soil and why soil is so important. So I think you have to base the decisions on what's the best use of soil, as I was trying to say. And if we, I hope we don't get to a world where we actually have to give up chocolate, which, we would if we just stopped flying any food, because we're not going to grow cocoa here. But I think it is about what is the best use of soil, and then also what's the best use of transport. And ocean transport at the minute is shocking, and it's been left out of a lot of agreements. There's so much we could do to change the carbon efficiency of ocean transport. We need to do that. So yeah, I try not to buy stuff that is air freighted in because of the carbon footprint, but I know it's much more complicated. It's about land, and it's also about livelihoods.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Caroline. Bob, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think two things I'd like to say. First is that we are a trading nation. We import 48% of the food that we consume. Bananas, take that as an example, is Britain's favourite fruit. When you walk into a supermarket, it's usually one of the first things that you see, because it has the most number of stocking units in a supermarket on a daily basis. And that's important for smallholder farmer livelihoods across the Caribbean, across Central America and West Africa. So I think we just have to get the balance. I think we could grow more fruit and veg in the United Kingdom. If you look at how that's deteriorated in terms of production in horticulture over the past 30 years, it's particularly top fruit in Yorkshire. We could grow a lot more apples, pears, etc. if we really had a proper plan, invested in it, and looked at innovation to get more young people interested in the sector. So I think there is an opportunity to scale up the fruit and vegetable production in the United Kingdom, but also some of the important trade routes and supply chains are really important for other people's economies as well.
Thank you for that, Bob. There's another question that's come in, and it's around about how. I mean, you're in a university, Bob. That's where you're based. You came from industry, I believe. So you've got that understanding. You've got that sort of the knowledge of where the commercial kind of drivers are. But how do we teach and educate the younger people to buy healthy and sustainable food? That's one of the questions that's come in on the. How do we facilitate that? How do we make that happen?
It's a really good question, and that's what we're doing at the moment within Fix Our Food. We've set up a Leaders for Change schools network across Yorkshire, from Bradford all the way across to Scarborough. And we're working with schools, both with the children, and I think Nigel mentioned quite rightly, you need to give young people a voice in these debates. We're working with teachers and parents, and also procurement, catering managers, and also the local education authorities as well, trying to design new school food menus and food environments that change the culture around food. If you think, if you go to a school and everybody's probably had their own children who've gone to a school, people get 20 minutes to eat their lunch. The food is very, very narrow in terms of its offering, and so we're getting getting children to design their own menus and what a good food school would look like. And then obviously trying to integrate that with procurement and maybe source that produce from regenerative farmers as well in the Yorkshire food system. So I think it's important, and also working on new educational resources, showing young people that by eating this, that's tasty, but is better for the environment and also better for your health, actually giving them the ammunition or the tools to go and make their own decisions. And I think that's really important.
Oh, thank you for that. Thanks, Bob. That was a really helpful answer. I'm just picking up a point that Caroline made in her earlier presentation around urgency. It feels to me that there's much discussion currently in the press about kind of COP26 and who is and who isn't coming and all the rest of it. But do you think have we got the urgency? Do people understand our situation well enough? And is there an urgency that we need to kind of somehow instill in a wider group of people to get things happening, in your opinion, Caroline?
Yes, sadly, I don't think people do get the urgency, because people keep talking about 2050, and by 2050 it is too late. We will have completely overshot by 2050, and we'll be into what people call runaway climate change if we don't do something by 2030. And all this wonderful technology that people are talking about, well, goodness, I hope it happens, but we're not going to have that technology in place by 2030, which is actually why soil is so important. It is the technology we know. So it's the urgency that says to me, soil is what matters. And it's one of the reasons we work on food. There was one thing, I don't know how many people actually get into the detail of the IPCC reports and read them, but the scientists, it went through every government, had a chance to comment. It was consensus. So it's, it's not shouting from the rooftops, even though we think the scientists are saying it's code red. But it said very little about tipping points, because we have uncertainty about tipping points. But if we get tipping points in the Arctic and the Antarctic and in the oceans, anything you've seen on a graph, that's irrelevant. We're off. Humans are done. We just don't know yet when those tipping points will come. They probably will come, whether it's hundreds or thousands of years, hopefully not decades. But it's because of those tipping points that could kick in before 2 degrees of global warming that we have to act for 2030, because we will be too late by 2050.
Can I put that out to Bob? Would you like to add anything into that as well?
No, I mean, I completely agree with Caroline. It's, we need that action now. And I think I said, I think you asked me this question at the end of my talk, and I think, learning, I think things that people like Nigel in what he's doing in his business, I mean, those things should be, he's leading the way. They should be mandatory. I'd like to see more, reporting from companies, more peer learning, right across the globe, really, to have a big impact quickly. It is urgent. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Bob. Nigel, is there anything that we can learn from how supply chains are picking up with this? We're certainly noticing the clients that we have, where the debate we're having now around sustainability and particularly around carbon is getting louder and louder. What are your thoughts on that, Nigel?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, you get to a certain age in life, and I was thinking perhaps I would retire at 62, which is next March. And then because I was thinking, well, nobody's particularly interested in sustainability. But my goodness, how that has changed in the past 18 months to 2 years. It's to the point at which that's why I decided, right, perhaps I would set up a consultancy and slide out into a different sort of retirement. People have suddenly woken up, and I think it is the pressure that we're getting through, the focus of activists and various things like that. So they've definitely woken up. They're asking the right questions. They are actually choosing suppliers who have a better sustainability record than others. They will just about pay a little bit more for a sustainable supplier. But where I think business is going to be set is if you look at all the many surveys that are out there. So for things like fair trade, for organic and for sustainability, you normally get in surveys about 65 to 70% of people will say we prefer those, but they only translate to about a 10 to 15% buying decision ultimately. Why? Because they still buy on price and quality. So if business wants to be part of this change, it needs to use its environmental and sustainability agenda to drive price and quality down. And I think that is entirely possible. If you use the triple bottom line approach, you can, yes, you have to invest. And yes, that investment return will be longer, maybe double what it is for other investments. But if you're a company that's, we're celebrating our centenary, we want to be here for another 100 years, we want to be on a nice planet in 100 years' time. It won't be any of us on this call, sadly, but that's the point, isn't it? I think that you can still run your business in a profitable way, but be sustainable at the same time and drive it, if you like, so the consumer does not have to make the choice. The choice is obvious because the price and quality has been driven down by the most sustainable products. That's where we should be. They shouldn't have to have that choice. You shouldn't have to disadvantage poor people because they can't afford to buy the sustainable product. I think business can do it.
Thanks, Nigel. Thank you for that. Just a question for you, Steve Noblet, down there in Sheffield today. You're getting access to our markets. You're aware of where we're headed. You understand the kind of the openings that are taking place. Do you think companies can do more to kind of promote just how sustainable they are? Is there something we need to be better about that? Is that something we should go on to? Sorry, Steve, I just lost you. I think you're on mute. Not quite sure. I think we may have lost Steve. He seems to be freezing down there. I'm not sure if he's.
I'm just waiting for the cat to walk across his screen.
I'm just wondering. There's something strange going on there. I think we'll wait for Steve to come back in. Hopefully he will. Maybe we can get some technical assistance. We've got a couple of interesting questions that maybe I'll just kind of broaden out a little bit more. And this is a. Sorry, Steve, you're with us again. Are you? No, you're not, are you? You definitely aren't. No, I think I will just leave Steve for a moment. There's a question here from David Robinson of North East Lincolnshire Council, and he's asking the panel, with climate change likely to impact supplies of fresh water and 2/3 of the planet covered in salt water, what role could marine environment play in delivering healthy, sustainable food? I'm gonna start that one. I hope you don't mind me starting that one with you, Caroline, with that Future for Food hat on. I think you're the ideal candidate to field that one.
Well, I'm no ocean scientist and I'm not up on the ocean science sufficiently, but in general, I think actually we know less about the science of oceans than we do about land and farming that as humans we've been doing for so long. Do you think food is going to come more from the ocean? There's really interesting stuff going about seaweed, whether that's to ensure that cattle emit less methane or as forms of new alternative foods for us as humans. So definitely very high potential, but, and there's two buts, we're damaging the oceans already, acidification, corals dying, there's a lot of dangerous stuff happening in the oceans. And we're really good at finding a solution that we scale up with unintended consequences. So whether it's algae or seaweed that we suddenly decide is the solution, or if it's worms and insects, I saw someone else asked about insect food, fine, but then we try and scale them up to feed the whole world and we will cause counterproductive effects. So we have to look at things as a whole system and really let the scientists help us to understand that and not go for just quick solutions. That's my non-scientific take.
Absolutely, thank you. No, thank you for that. Steve, did you? I think you're. I can see you, but I'm not quite sure if you're hearing us. I don't think you are. It looks like you're frozen. No. I think you're frozen. Okay. I think what we'll probably just do is there's a couple of things I'd just like to kind of raise as just to discuss with the panel. It's something that you mentioned in your presentation, Caroline, about where we're going with soil, how all of this needs to be joined up, and I think one of the reasons we're quite active in the area that we are at the moment is because of this incredibly close correlation between soil health and water quality. A lot of the work that we're doing at the moment, we're based in the East Riding, so I'm more than happy to kind of our office is based there. We do a lot of our work in the East Riding and across Yorkshire. And we're starting to see a real kind of, people starting to understand soil more and understanding cause and effect. we looked in America. We took a bunch of farmers over to America, and we saw the absolute best management of soil from some of the guys, the Gabe Browns and the Jay Furas of this world. I mean, incredible, such a learning journey. But we drove along the Red River Valley from Minneapolis across to South Dakota, and it's very rainy when we were there, and there were rivers of erosion coming over, and during periods of heavy rain. So we saw the very best in the and some of the more challenging elements of farming. Do you think there's something we need to do around that connectivity agenda? Is there more that needs to be done, getting people to understand cause and effect? I threw that one at you, Caroline, if you don't mind.
Sorry, I wasn't sure who that was for. Yes, definitely. And for me, that's one of the strengths of regenerative agriculture. People know regenerative agriculture is about soil health, but it's actually just not only about soil health, and it is very related. And we're also looking at regenerative agriculture in the US. And it's really interesting there where ecosystem services markets are actually now being piloted and trialed. And I think water quality will be a key element of that. So I don't think everything can be translated into a market mechanism, but some things can. And I think we'll even see market mechanisms valuing soil health and water quality. And one other thing, my background's actually in international development. And in huge parts of the developing world, salinization of water, lack of water, water scarcity, water stress, they're already huge issues. And that's not only terrible for people and their livelihoods and their access both to agricultural water and potable water, it's also a major source of conflict. And we've already seen that in the world in the last few decades, and I have a horrible feeling we'll see that more. So I think water's the very hot issue.
No, I agree. Thank you. Do you add anything into that, Bob, with your understanding in this area?
In terms of, I completely agree about everything that's been said on soil health. I mean, in a way, it's that medium long-term thinking, because that's what you use. That's your substrate, isn't it, to grow the food? And I think Franklin D. Roosevelt said in the 1940s that a nation that looks after its soil looks after itself. And I think we've forgotten that. And in debates around these issues, soil is often neglected in the discussion. So I think it's really important that we invest in our soils. And there are obviously different types of soils, and so knowing more about how different types of soils work with different approaches in regenerative agriculture is also important. We don't know enough about that. I mean, Nigel works with a number of amazing farmers who are doing amazing things. How can we get farmers to learn from each other as well? How can we escalate and scale up that kind of peer-to-peer learning between farmers? Because I think there are some really, really good practices taking place that are building a really, really good soil health in the UK. But we need to get that. We need to speed that up and scale it up. So yeah, and these farmers, like your trip to the US, Steve, they're very proud, aren't they? They really want to show you their soil. They want to dig it up and show you what it looks like and the improvements in it. And their yields do improve. Or they're going to take a few years because they're not using the same inputs, but then the yields very quickly get back to the way they were previously when they were using lots of inputs. So, and I think in succession, it's important for if younger people on the farm are going to take over going forward, then that investment in the soil is for their livelihoods for the future. And I think that's really, really important as well. But we do need to encourage more younger farmers into farming. I think the kind of incentives and the pricing, we do need to kind of unpack how we can bring more young people in to be interested in the future of farming.
No, I agree with that, Bob. I think one of the good things about the work we're doing with Nigel and some of the farmers growing barley that's ultimately used for Heineken, it's all about sharing that knowledge. This is, you're learning in one area, but you're sharing it with a number of others. The same thing is happening in our conversations with, we're in quite a sort of close partnership with Yorkshire Water. And because of that real cause and effect benefit of soil health, water quality, there's a different agenda now. I mean, farmers now look upon Yorkshire water in a completely different way, which has really surprised me in the last few years how that's changed. But it really has been brought about by Yorkshire Water wanting to be a partner and not coming at it from a legislative or a mandatory kind of standpoint, but saying, well, actually, if you improve soil health, our water quality gets better. So there is a real win-win, and I think we're starting to see that. Would you agree, Nigel, with that? Some of those thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. I wouldn't mind just picking up on what Bob said there. I think it's very much about the case studies. I think we've seen this in our group that when we went back to 2013, 14, some of the things that maybe you and I were suggesting at the time, the farmers thought we were nuts. And they weren't backward in telling us so, and heckled from all around the room. And within a couple of years, those heckling farmers were very proud to stand up and present, maybe for the first time they'd ever presented, on how much money they'd saved by doing these various things which couldn't possibly be done. And I tell you, I just wanted to share my favorite metric from when that group was established. And we got some Dutch farmers across to try and persuade the Yorkshire farmers it was a good thing to do these things. And they put all these metrics up, and you can see people, you know, just a minute. They got down to that one that said, I'm 36% happier. And there's just a minute. How do you know you're 36% happier? She said, my wife told me I'm less miserable and I'm enjoying myself. Now I'm doing sustainable farming. And I think that's really important. As Bob was saying, we found that if you're more enthusiastic as a farmer, your children are more likely to follow you. We have big burly farmers in Yorkshire talking about the fact that for the first time ever, once they planted flowers around the outside of their field, the kids wanted to go out in the evening into the fields. Not when Dad was going on about his latest tractor or how much soil he turned over and all this, how much pesticide. It was, they liked catching butterflies. Why not? Because it got them interested.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's, sorry, go on. Yeah, please, Bob.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, one of the things we're doing at the moment is we're working with our schools platform. It's called Leaders for Change. And they're working with a group of farmers to design what a school trip would look like on the farm. And I think that is connecting, these are schools, remember, in inner city areas, as well as schools in rural communities. But so that removing that disconnect between young people and farming, and, you know, demonstrating the importance of things like soil that they're probably taken for granted is really important, I think.
I agree. No, thank you for that. I think we've got through kind of most of the questions that we were asked. There's a couple there that I will get to. I will reply to outside of the meeting, which will be, I think. Can I just say a massive thank you to all of the panelists for being part of this session. It's been fascinating. Always, whenever I meet up, and I know most of the people on here, met Caroline for the first time today, but it's fascinating the knowledge and the skill that there is within this region, and potentially, you know, adding value in this sector. Can I just say a really big thank you to Marketing Humber for putting on the Waterline Conference. I think it's been the Waterline Summit has been fascinating. This area. Food and drink, I've always made a real fuss about this. Food and drink is massively important to this area. I know that people know, but I think Yorkshire is the only county in the country which actually has a representative of every type of farming on land. That's what we are. It's so important to this sector. And a really big thank you to Marketing Humber for putting this conference on, and for pulling this excellent panel together. And thank you all individually for your input and your insight into what's going on. I really appreciate it. I'm not quite sure what's happening next, but there is a continuation of the Waterline Summit. I'm hoping that somebody will give me a bit of a heads up as to what that might be. But please, you know where the website is. There's sessions going on into tomorrow, and so can I just say a massive thank you to everybody for joining us and for your excellent questions. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks for chairing, Steve.
Thank you all.
Very much.